to the Con Guy podcast and our Jaws 55th anniversary Shark Week celebration right here on that hashtag show network. As always, brought to you by the Nept Vodka, reminding you to please drink responsibly. My name is Jim Fry, and joining me today is the esteemed actor, comedian, and contributor to the Con Guy, Ben Cleaver.
Oh, hi, everybody.
Along with our own Cheeseman on the couch, Luke Cheeseman.
What's up, everyone?
As well as Jake Jerley from the Jacobus system. Good to have you, Jake.
Now, guys?
Very good. 2020 has been a rough year and may have shut everything down, but sharks cannot catch COVID. As far as we know, gosh, if they can, this is going to be another rough year. So Shark Week still reigns supreme as it has for over 30 years. And this week, the Con Guy is celebrating the granddaddy shark of them all, Steven Spielberg's classic masterpiece from 1975, Jaws. In 1975, it came along and altered all of our trips to the beach forever. To help us celebrate this milestone, we are honored to be joined by the esteemed co-writer of Jaws, Mr. Carl Gottlieb. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Gottlieb. Carl is an American screenwriter, actor, comedian, and executive. And although he is probably best known for co-writing the screenplay for Jaws and its first two sequels, he also directed the 1981 film Caveman, and he co-wrote the Steve Martin classic, The Jerk. He also wrote on such classic TV series as The Odd Couple, the Flip Wilson comedy specials, The Bob Newhart Show, one of my all-time favorites, and the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, to name just a few. He also is known to have inspired many, many people in the industry with his book, The Jaws Log, which to this day is still the definitive look at the making of the classic film. Carl, I just wanted to say this is an honor. You have some actors and screenwriters in the room, and we are so happy to have you with us today.
Good to be here. Thanks, you.
And just right up at the front, I know that Luke, you were wanting to talk to Carl about where we first met him.
Yeah, so here's a quick photo. This is the Jaws Art Gallery. Both me and Jim are standing beside you, but we met you there, and we talked to you kind of briefly there. You came kind of right, I think, as the gallery was closing, but we had a great conversation. You told us about the Jaws log, which I bought right after that. And then actually we bought a couple art prints. Jake, my friend Jake there, he was getting married. I was the best man at the wedding. So I was like, what better gift than to give him a signed Jaws print? And then you signed it on there. And what did he say, Jake?
He said, to Jake, who will no longer go swimming with bow-legged women.
All right.
I got one here as well. So we're twinsies on our prints.
All right. Carl, thank you for joining us today to celebrate Shark Week and especially the 45th anniversary of Jaws. But before we talk about Jaws, I know everybody wants to hear about it, but we're super interested in kind of your earlier career as well. You had an exciting career before Jaws. You were you're a comedian and an improv comedian, an actor, and you were with a comedy group called The Committee, and how that led you to writing with the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Can you talk to us a little bit about your early beginnings there?
Sure. When I got out of the Army in 1963 or thereabouts, a friend of mine had just joined this brand new theater company in San Francisco called The Committee. They were an offshoot of, or similar to Second City, but they were much more political. They were very politically involved in social satire and politics. And they needed a stage manager, and I was fresh on the street out of the Army. I had stage manager and technical experience. So I joined the company as a stage manager and worked with them for a couple of years, directed them while half the show went to New York, and I stayed behind and directed the caretaker company that kept the theater open. And they came back from New York, and then I realized that my time there was I had done everything. I went to New York, worked for the same producer who had produced The Committee on Broadway, a wonderful producer named Arthur Cantor. So I worked on Broadway. I had an office in the Sardi's building. I worked with Arthur Cantor on a show as a company manager. And then Alan Meyerson, who was the producer, director, owner of The Committee, was forming a second company of actors because the first company was going to open a new theater and improvise plays. So they needed a company for the original theater, and Alan was coming to New York and asked me to set up auditions for New York actors, which I did. And while we were doing the auditioning process, which in improv is not, anybody reading sides, nobody prepares material. You basically play theater games and you see how well people play the games, and you can tell from that if they're improvisers or not. And after playing a lot of games with a lot of potential improvisers, I realized I was pretty good at it myself. So I said to Alan, how about if I come back as an actor? So he said, let me check with the director, as Peter Bonners was directing that company, and Peter said, fine. So in '66, I went back to the committee as an actor, and changed my life. I mean, it was San Francisco, it was the summer of love, the Haight-Ashbury, the free speech movement, all of that turmoil, San Francisco in the 60s, and ground zero for the Cultural Revolution. We were a part of it. The committee was active in politics. And then we did so well that the decision was made to take a company of committee improvisers to Los Angeles. So in '68, we opened at the Tiffany Theater in Los Angeles and scored unanimously rave reviews from the two mainstream daily newspapers, from the two or three industry trade papers, Daily Variety, Hollywood Reporter, and the alternative press, the Avatar and the LA Free Press. So we were a hit across the board. We had a 350-seat theater right on the Sunset Strip. We did 6 nights a week, 13 shows, 2 shows a night, free on Saturday. And the show was successful and fun. Smothers Brothers came to see the show one night, and they thought that I would be a good person to write on their show. They were assembling new writers. So they asked me and Steve Martin and Rob Reiner and Alan and Mason Williams and Chris Beard and Alan Bly. And anyway, so Murray Roman. So we became writers on the Glenn Campbell show and then the Smothers Brothers show. And then that led to the Emmy for that '68-'69 season. And I also had worked for Robert Altman in the movie of MASH. So my career as a improvising comedy actor was well established. And as a writer, because I was working on these hit shows as a writer. And just one job led to another. And before you know it, there I was, I had an Emmy, I was writing, and my friend Steven Spielberg and I were writing together, and he asked me to work on a script that he was developing called Jaws, and that changed my life again. I went to Martha's Vineyard 3 weeks before principal photography, rewrote on location, staying barely ahead of the schedule, performed in the movie as an actor, and just, from there on, went from one job to another. That led to Richard Pryor and Flip Wilson and Steve Martin and directing Caveman. So for students of Carl Gottlieb, go on IMDb and look me up.
I'm going to throw it over to the other guys in just a second, but I have one question. I rewatched The Jerk this week, and that thing still holds up. It's still very funny. But your work on the Smothers Brothers, and movies like The Jerk, I guess my question is, do you think that comedy is as courageous today as it once was? Because on the Smothers Brothers, you guys really pushed the envelope, and I guess the censors were always wanting to put up a red flag for you guys, but you're like, screw it, we're going to keep on doing it. Do we have the same kind of comedy? Are audiences too sensitive today?
No, I have to point out that in 1975, I guess it was, Saturday Night Live went on the air, and they pushed the envelope. I mean, the real cutting edge work was being done on Saturday Night and the stand-ups of the world, the 70s and 80s, gave us, Ray Romano and Jerry Seinfeld, and then later Patton Oswalt and Lily Tomlin. We had there was no shortage of talent. As a matter of fact, there was a weird period there in the 70s where I had worked with every comic genius in the business, and for the first time in the history of comedy, there were no Jewish comics. Think about it: Steve Martin, Lily Tomlin, Richard Pryor, and Robin Williams. Not a Catskill comic in the bunch. Not a Jackie, not a Shecky, none of those jokes. Take my wife, please. We didn't do those. So comedy stayed that way for a while, and right up until recently with Louis C.K. and Sarah Silverman, there's some wonderful cutting edge comics. Mm-hmm. Patton is still the greatest, but in the end, it's just going to get more complicated before it gets simpler.
Now, with that, as Jaws was an inspirational movie to filmmakers, do you feel like your films like The Jerk and a lot of the comedy you're writing started the path for films like Airplane and for Dumb and Dumber and just other stuff in the future? Do you feel like a lot of the stuff and the writers you're working with made an influence on the comedic writing of the future?
Oh yeah, and in comedy, it's like pop music. There are multiple streams feeding the giant river of comedy. So you've got from the improvisational area, you've got things like the Groundlings and the Upright Citizens Brigade, who are continuing to feed talent into the machine. Then you've got single stand-up comics who do well and get their own TV shows. That used to be the goal. There's I like to think that the committee and the things that I did were instrumental and helped pave the way. But we weren't alone. There was lots of people doing comedy, and it all blended together. And even guys like Rodney Dangerfield and Jonathan Winters were progressive enough and had an audience that crossed over. Robin Williams and Jonathan Winters, had huge respect for each other and fed off of each other, and actually did some great guest appearances together. Mm-hmm. So, you've got, all kinds of influences. It's very complicated. You could draw a family tree of comedy, and it would be extremely complex. I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's a family tree of rock and roll. That's a beautiful work of art. I don't have it handy to show you, but trust me, it's out there.
Yeah. Carl, I did want to say that Patton Oswalt is one of my personal favorite comedians, so I appreciate that you brought him up. I did want to ask, can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Steven Spielberg, both personal and professional, prior to 1974 and working on Jaws?
Sure. We had the same agent, a very forward-looking creative agent named Mike Medavoy, who went on to run United Artists and become an executive in his own. He ran Phoenix Pictures. Mike, as an agent, was one of the first guys to believe in the synergy of putting clients together. So he put me and Steven together, and we wrote ideas for screenplays. I just found one from January of '74. It's really good. We could make it today. But we couldn't sell a single one because Steven was locked into direct. That was one of Mike's conditions when we shopped the scripts around. And nobody wanted to trust Steven as a director. He had only done television at that point. And I think Duel was in the can, but that wasn't a comedy. I did 2 Steven Spielberg movies as an actor for him before Jaws. I did Something Evil, which was an early version of The Exorcist. And I did something called The Savage Report, which was a Martin Landau, Bob Rebane pilot after Mission Impossible. And when Jaws came along, Steven gave me the script and said, can you find a spot for yourself? It would be great if you came out as an actor and helped me with the actors improvising. And I said, sure. So I picked the character of Meadows. And then he sent me the script and asked me for notes, and I gave him a bunch of notes, one of which was exactly right and one of which was exactly wrong. The wrong note, I said, does the girl who has sex in the first scene have to die? Because that's so horror movie cliche, have sex, die. But it turns out it was an exceptionally vivid first scene, so I was totally wrong about that one. I also said, if we, Stephen and I, do our jobs right, people will feel about going in the water the way they felt about taking a shower after Psycho.
Right.
And for the next 45 years, anytime I ever met anyone and told them I worked on Jaws, their first comment to me was, after I saw that movie, I didn't go swimming, I didn't go, I've heard that for 45 years. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Now, you did say you came onto the project and picked the character of Meadows, and then you did notes and worked pretty heavily on the script. And as I understand it, the character of Meadows had a much larger part before you started working on the script. So you kind of did the opposite of what most actors would do, and kind of shrank your part.
Yes, the most painful thing I ever did as a writer was cut my part as an actor. But it was for the good of the show.
Do you remember much about like Peter Benchley's version of the screenplay, like some things that were in there originally that you kind of ended up changing out, or what some of the earlier drafts were?
I never saw Peter's draft. I saw Howard Sackler's rewrite of Peter's draft, but that was a script that Zanuck and Brown envisioned Charlton Heston and Jan-Michael Vincent in. And that wasn't going to work. We basically shit-canned that script and began afresh and trimming all the fat and all the backstory and all the secondary plot stuff about the mayor and the mafia and the real estate interests. And basically we pruned away all the undergrowth, and what was left was Jaws.
I noticed you say you trimmed out the mafia story. I recently read the Peter Benchley's novel just last year, a couple of years ago, and that was an interesting storyline. But you guys definitely made the right decision. What was your guiding principle on what was being cut from the novel as opposed to what you're keeping?
With any film, basically, once you figure out what the story is, anything that doesn't serve the story has to go. So the story was three guys confronting a fish.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else was useless.
Yeah, true. If you had to, who are your favorite characters in the script, in the film? Who are some of your favorite characters and why?
This is Sophie's choice. You have children. Which one do you leave behind for the Nazis? Don't ask me that. They're all. I love them all.
Yeah.
I helped create them. Why would I favor one over the other?
Yep.
The man
Now,
makes a point.
Yeah.
You spoke before about how you take stuff from people would say at dinners or on set or different things, because you were working so closely with the actors that you could bring those things into the screenplay. What were some of those? Do you remember some of those things or lines or things the actor said that made its way into the script?
Sure. Crushing the plastic cup. That happened while we were talking to Richard in Boston, trying to get him to do the movie. He had already passed. But we asked him to come up to Boston and meet, because we were doing a rewrite, and we wanted to tell him the rewrite would have more humor. And we were at the Holiday Inn, where the room service consisted of plastic cups and styrofoam cups and paper plates. And somebody crushed a cup and looked funny, and Steven said, put that in the script. And I said, I will. It's a good joke. And sure enough, there you were. So there, you take stuff where you find it. Leafy Arrow did not like her speech when she slapped Brody, and she refused to say the lines. So at the last minute, I had to write a new speech for her, which she did perfectly and slapped the shit out of Roy Scheider. And it's a great moment in the movie, and I'm very proud of her as an actor for forcing me to write that speech the way it turned out, and for her to deliver it the way she delivered it.
That's so great the way that I think and I'll pitch over to Ben right after this, but like, do you think that your background as an actor, how much did that inform how you wrote the screenplay of Jaws? It sounds like you did have kind of like a collaborative operation going on there with the actors when it comes to the script.
Oh yeah, no. When you're working as closely with the director and the actors as we did in Jaws, everything they do becomes grist for the mill. If you've done your job as a writer, you've created characters that the actors can inhabit, and if they decide to ad-lib, they'll ad-lib in character, not just an actor trying to invent more dialogue for themselves. So it's a perfect example. To this day, it's the happiest collaboration of my life. Everybody was contributing all the time. Everything people did. I was listening to the actors. I could write in their voices. Craig Kingsbury, who was a Martha's Vineyard character, said a lot of things that wound up in Quint's dialogue. Because when Spielberg met Craig, he said, "Carl, you got to listen to this guy. He's got a great turn of phrase." So Craig got a part in the movie, and we got free dialogue.
There you go. Speaking of free dialogue, obviously you're coming from an improv background, and you encouraged a lot of that on set. How much of the actors' ad-libbed or improvised lines ended up in the final script, or in the final cut, I should say?
Some, it is really hard to tell, and I have forgotten. And if it's a really important point, occasionally I will go back to the lined script and the production log that tells us where we were every minute of every day, and I can research stuff. But I stopped doing that years ago. It's impossible to separate that stuff. I mean, everybody was working, and Verna Fields, who won an Academy Award for her editing, was present at every dinner and every set of changes with past Verna, who would comment on them and give us an editor's point of view. And you got to remember, an editor is the only person in the movie, besides the director and the script supervisor and the writer, who carries the whole film in her head at all times. Everybody else just has to do the day's work. That's why being an actor is so simple. You show up at the set, say your words, you go home. Only the four people I talked about, the director, the writer, the script supervisor, and the editor, have to understand the whole film all the time.
Right. Now, as an actor myself, one of my favorite monologues in cinema history is the Robert Shaw's Indianapolis speech that he gives when they're on the boat. How did that scene and that monologue evolve from beginning to what we got in the end? And as I understand it, did you send that scene to like George Lucas, Zemeckis, Bob Gale? Do you remember any of the advice that they give on that?
Steven was very nervous about that speech. It doesn't occur in the novel, and Sackler introduced it because he was a Navy guy and understood history of the Navy, so he knew about the Indianapolis, and he's the guy who put it in the script. And it was always like a 2-page, 3-page scene. It was a monstrous block of dialogue.
Yeah.
And Steven was very nervous about shooting it. So he sent it to all his friends for contributions. And some people, wrote stuff down. Some people sent stuff in over the phone. John Milius was on the phone. But I kept track of everything. And eventually we gave all the material, 5 different versions, to Robert Shaw. Now, Robert Shaw, I think he got a Pulitzer Prize for drama. He wrote The Man in the Last Booth and 5 novels. So Shaw is the writer who took all the speeches and synthesized his monologue and came to dinner at one night and said, I think I've got that pesky speech licked. He read it to us, and Steven said, that's what we're shooting, and that's what we shot. And there's like one line from John Milius in it, and even though he's been claiming credit for that speech for decades, it's not true.
Yes.
And I do a lengthy end note in my book about it, in which I conclude, who do you believe, the guy who was there and tells you I didn't write it, and the guy who wasn't there who says I did? So Robert Shaw wrote that. And also, there's something here I want to show you.
Yeah.
See this book?
Sure.
It's copyright 1961.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, there is the thing about Herbie Robinson, the bosun's mate who turns upside down and is eaten.
Mm-hmm.
That's in that book. Sackler stole that.
Oh my gosh.
A fan sent it to me years ago, and I realized that the speech didn't originate with Sackler. I mean, it originated with Sackler, but he cribbed. He stole from research and took items from this book and put them in his speech. So this is a very valuable research book if you're going to write Jaws again.
All right. And that was a narrative book?
What's that?
And that was a narrative book? That shark book?
Yeah, it's a nonfiction book about sharks with drawings and photos.
Hey, Carl, I have a question. You say if Jaws were made again today, which, it would not be, hopefully. But, like, if it were, I believe that Jaws is something that could not be made today the same way it was when it was made. It would just be so much CGI and so much stuff that would ruin it. And plus the storyline would change, and it wouldn't, because, it did have a patience to the storyline back then. It's almost like a perfect script the way it was written. How do you think it would be different today if it were made today? And why did it need to be made when it was made?
Well, it needed to be made because it was a bestseller. It was a popcorn summer movie. Everybody knew. The novel had sold, millions of copies. It was a huge hit. There was no reason not to make the novel into a summer movie. That was clear. Mm-hmm. That was always the intention. And it was released in the summer, but it was only at the first preview in spring of '75 that the studio realized, hey, we can open this on more than 30 screens. We can open this wide. And nobody had ever done that before. So there were, it was a groundbreaker all around. Could it be made today? I don't know. Could you make Casablanca today? Could you make Gone with the Wind today? No. It was made what it was made because that was the time to make it.
Yep.
It was the 70s. There was a second golden age of American filmmaking. Bonnie and Clyde were being made. Robert Altman was directing, and Michelangelo Antonioni. Mike Lee in England. The Richard Lester. The Beatles were making movies. It was a great time to be alive and making movies. Mm-hmm. So it's very much a product of its time. Why did it last 45 years? I don't know. Why do people look at the Mona Lisa when other paintings by the same author or same painter don't attract that kind of attention? It's art. Who the fuck knows? If we knew how to do it, we'd do it every time.
Yep.
Nobody knows.
So, Jake, speaking about the Jaws log in the book, Jake, you have a question.
Oh, Carl, I was just going to say, your book, The Jaws Log, at the time was really one of the first books that really delved so deep into the making of a particular movie. Because before then, were there that many books really that
there was
went that
a
deep?
book that I used as a model for my work. It was a book by Lillian Hellman, published in the early 60s. It was called Picture. It was a 4-parter or 3-parter in the New Yorker. Later published the book, and it chronicled the making of Red Badge of Courage, which John Huston directed and Audie Murphy starred in. And it was a book about the making of a movie. Also, there was a book called, interestingly enough, also about John Huston, called White Hunter, Black Heart, about the making of The African Queen with Humphrey Bogart. So those 2 books were kind of my inspiration. And I wanted to write a book as good as those. So that was what I tried to do. The way the Jaws log came about was the studio had the bright idea. They were just beginning to dabble in cross-marketing and cross-promotion. So the notion was, they had lunchboxes and coffee mugs and a couple of T-shirts, but that was it as far as merchandising went. And somebody at the tower at Universal had the bright idea of, you know what? Let's publish a coffee table book with a section by the director, a section by the producers, and a section by the novelist, with lots of glossy photos from the production. And it'll be all about Jaws, and we'll put it out when we put out the movie. Okay. And Steven, who was working hard on preparing Close Encounters, said, I don't have the time for that. Carl, will you ghostwrite my section of the book? So I said, okay. So, and then Zanuck Brown had other fish to fry, and Peter Benchley didn't need to write it. So the studio came to me and said, and this was like March, they said, can you do a book in time to come out for the summer? And I recklessly said, yes. And the beauty of it was March of 75, and everybody had worked on the film in 74 was around. I could talk to anybody who was, first of all, I was there on the set for 4 months writing and acting. So I had all that down. And that was my first-hand experience. And for things that I hadn't seen or witnessed firsthand, I could talk to the people involved. I talked to Rod and Valerie Taylor. I talked to Carl Rizzo, who was the little man who played Hooper in the shark sequence.
Oh.
I talked to Bob Maddy, who built the shark. I got to talk to Roy Arbogast, who did special effects. I got to talk to everybody who was involved in the making of the movie, and I took copious notes. And then I went away to a fat farm and wrote the book in 6 weeks. It got published, and it was it was on the bestseller list when it came out. And to this day, it's the best-selling book about the making of a movie ever.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congrats on
that. And then I did a 25th anniversary edition and a 30th anniversary edition, and another modified HarperCollins edition. Every publisher who held the book looked at the sales numbers and said, "Hey, let's do this again." So yeah, there it is, and it has a lot of end notes that I wrote, because starting with the 25th anniversary edition, looks like this.
Oh, nice.
I got to go back and revisit some of the stuff that I didn't have time to put in, or people asked me not to write about it, or for whatever reason. So I went back, and I got a chance to explain the Indianapolis speech. So I went back and did copious endnotes, which became incorporated into every subsequent edition.
Nice.
Pete eventually wrote a foreword that said Carl Gottlieb got it exactly right, which did not hurt.
Yeah.
Luke?
Now, I had a question about the book, and I like how you included some pictures in it. And I want to know a little bit more about this when you fell out of the boat into the water. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, that was probably the first week of shooting, maybe the second. And that was a scene in which the editor of the newspaper and the police chief find, and the oceanographer find Ben Gardner's boat with Ben Gardner dead in it. So they had Ben Gardner's boat, and Fascinating Rhythm was ostensibly that was Richard Dreyfuss's boat. And we started shooting that scene, and as you see from the pictures, I lost my footing and went headfirst into the water. And they did not have a second suit for me to wear, and they had no dry clothes. So rather than kill a half a day of shooting time waiting for my costume to dry, they said, "Fuck it, we'll do it later. We'll come back for that." So the scene was cut. And then later, much later, after the show had wrapped in Martha's Vineyard, Steven wanted to do that scary moment with Ben Gardner's head. So we found pieces of the orca, we found the head, the model that had been constructed for that particular purpose, went out to Verna Fields' swimming pool in the valley and shot the discovery of the head in a swimming pool in Van Nuys. Biggest screen in the movie to this day.
Yeah, we had talked to Joe Alves about that too. He kind of expanded on that as well.
Good.
And you were kind of freaked out when you fell in the water, right?
What?
You were a little freaked out when you did fall in the water?
Well, I knew there were sharks in the water.
And you were writing a shark movie.
I was writing a shark movie, but I was out and back. I mean, my hat never got wet. That's how fast I was getting out.
Nice.
So that scene was supposed to originally take place in the day where they find Ben Gardner's body?
Yeah.
Wow. That's so weird, yeah.
So, Carl, we just have a few minutes left here with you. We want to talk a little bit also about your involvement with Jaws 2 and Jaws 3. Like, how different was that? How difficult? What was the challenge of writing those two films?
All three were written the same way. They got into trouble with the script. They thought they could do it without me. And they wound up, well, it's true. Jaws 2 started with a different director and a different script. And after a week of dailies, it became obvious that he didn't know what he was doing. And they don't like to fire a director, but they did. They replaced the director. They shit-canned the script. They said, come up with an idea. We want to use young people. So I came up with the cruising culture. And they offered me Jaws 2 when it was in the planning stages. And they offered it to me. Did I say that Zanuck and Brown were stingy bastards?
You didn't say
Not
that
yet,
yet.
but I've heard that. in some
They were.
interviews.
They were. And they offered me the script for Jaws 2 at scale. Scale. So I turned them down, and I said to my agent, they'll be back, and it's going to cost them.
Good.
And sure enough, they fired John Hancock. They canned his script. They took a hiatus. They said, can you fix this? I said, I think so. I showed them how I would fix it. They said, okay, you're hired. Off you go to Orlando, Florida to write, to start writing. And that's what I did. And the same thing happened with Jaws 3D. They started without me. Richard Matheson wrote a script for Jaws 3D. They started it without me and with a new producer They didn't use Zanuck and Brown. They hired a guy named Alan Landsberg, who was even stingier than Zanuck and Brown, and he tried to make it for a price and was shooting in 3D, which is complicated, and he did not give Joe the room that he needed to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
So the climactic scene of Jaws 3D, which would have so benefited from a retake, was never reshot, and the film suffered for it.
Now, had you had both straight from the beginning, would you have written them differently, or did you have any ideas? No, I wish they would have done this.
Yeah, no, of course I would have written them differently, but they didn't hire me, so fuck them.
Exactly.
I was doing patchwork. I was doing repair work.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's fantastic.
I was working with what I had and what could be changed. They could recast the actors, some of them. They changed the finale. The shark had to die. It was again. It was a question of working within limits and being a good collaborator.
Yeah.
A very flexible director on Jaws 2 named Jeannot Swart. Again, Verna Fields was there as a studio executive and an editor consulting. So, again, it was a good collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been a better movie, but in its time, it was the best. It was the best-selling sequel of all time until Godfather 2.
I still like Jaws 2. I think it's a fun film.
It works. No doubt about it. It works.
Yeah,
I'm not ashamed of it.
yeah, the idea of being stranded out on the ocean in those sails, the sailboats, that was like a really unique idea. And
I love it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're gonna kind of start rounding up the podcast here. I know each of the guys is gonna have a question or two to ask you right here at the end. But we have one thing that we would like to do. We call it our lightning round, where Luke has 5 questions, and he just wants to ask you a quick question, and then whatever the first answer that you give us, that's your answer.
I'll play.
All right.
So, first question: favorite character in Jaws?
I don't have a favorite character. I like the composite of the 3 guys is terrific. It's like 3 sides of the same character.
Excellent. Question number 2: favorite line from the film?
I kind of like. I'm sitting there arguing with a man who's lining up to be a hot lunch.
I love that one as well. All right, number 3: favorite scene?
I like the scene on the dock because I'm in it, and Lee Fierro slaps Scheider, and everybody worked from the script. Everybody followed the script. I like the Indianapolis scene because the first half of it is what I wrote without any editing. The second half is what Shaw wrote. And obviously it's a great scene. Everybody knows that. And and the dinner scene with Scheider and the kids and Lorraine Gary and Hooper coming over with wine. That's a good scene.
Mm.
Awesome. Great answers. And number 4, do you have any props or Jaws memorabilia that you've collected over the years?
Very few. It was before the days of props. I have some pieces of wood from the hull of the Orca. I have one of the original T-shirts that Joe silk screened with the shark face on it that's been reproduced a million times.
Mm.
I have a lot of old scripts that are partial. No, my most treasured possession is the lined script that was bound by Rick Fields, who put together all the scripts and all the texts and all the sketch and storyboards into one bound book, which is beautiful. And it's the only complete script of Jaws that exists. There's no script of Jaws. There's a lot of scripts for sale, but none of them is the actual script because there never was a complete script of Jaws.
Well, I love that. And Question number 5, favorite day or memory filming?
My favorite day of filming was the shark on the dock. With the shark stank.
A lot of people are saying that. Like everybody we've talked to has said the day we had the shark hanging up and it stank up the whole island, basically.
Yep.
And then just one bonus question just for you. What was the favorite line or scene or just the favorite thing that you wrote in Jaws that you're the most proud of?
I'm most proud of Lee Fierro's speech before she slaps Scheider.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's cool. That's cool. All right. And Carl, we are coming to an end, but I know that both Jake and Ben probably have a final question they'd like to throw at you, and then we will wrap things up.
Good.
Go ahead, Jake.
Oh, I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say, Carl, I just want to say thank you so much for your work on these films. I'm sure you know how much they mean to everybody. And we're huge fans and just want to say thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Carl, what are you up to these days? Leave us off with what you're up to these days, and if you're involved with anything, writing, producing, anything like that.
I still have some scripts I've written that I would like to see get made. One's a big production movie about Somalian pirates, and another one is a musical set in 1917 Australia.
Oh wow!
And then there's a musical, another script I did about 3 women who win the lottery together and have to come to terms with each other. I've got a half a dozen really interesting scripts that should be made. I don't know if they ever will be, but I got paid for them, and they exist. So,
there you go.
Hey, Luke, what about you?
Yeah, like Jake, I just want to say again, it's just an honor to have you. You've already have done so much already. So hopefully these projects get made, but you've done so much with your life for comedy and just for shark fans or Jaws fans all over. And it was awesome meeting you a few years ago. Immediately went out and got this book. I definitely recommend people check out the Jaws log. And I was told someone recently that we interviewed that I showed my nieces and nephews. I love just showing them Jaws as kids, as people that are seeing it for the first time, and the jump scares and the way that the movie affects people still holds up today. So you've created a timeless movie that still scares people as it did back then.
I wish I knew how we did it.
Carl, thank you so much. Last question, Carl. Are you aware at all of the Return of the Orca project?
Yes, I've been in touch with David Bigelow on the Vineyard. Yeah, I'd love to be there for that.
Mm-hmm.
If we can travel, if COVID-19 isn't quarantine us all. But I'm all for it. I'd love to see it again.
Yeah. Carl, thank you so much for being part of the Con Guys show today. This has just been an honor for all of us. We just want to collectively say thank you. Happy 45th anniversary of the film that changed everybody's lives and changed the way we view the ocean. So much respect.
I'm still afraid.
All right.
And don't forget to pay sufficient respect to Universal Studios' Sid Sheinberg and Lou Wasserman, who created the multi-screen summer release pattern that persists to this day.
Yeah.
That was developed for Jaws. It never existed before Jaws.
There you go.
That's so cool. Yeah, Jaws was they describe it as the very first summer blockbuster. It opened wide, yeah.
Exactly. So it's not just a great piece of filmmaking, it's a great piece of studio marketing and sales and publicity and the synergy of creative talents working with release production talents in order to maximize the impact of a movie. You see what the effect has been.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Exponentially so. Is there, Carl, is there anything, last quick question, is there anything that you would like to say to the fans of your work, from any of your work, but especially from Jaws?
Keep on liking it. Buy stuff, send me money.
Yeah.
Got to make a living.
Yeah.
contribute to my general welfare, and obviously you're going to keep the memory of the film alive. I don't have to do anything for that. It's always Shark Week somewhere on the planet. and this week I think is officially Shark Week on
Discovery Channel.
Discovery Channel. So there you go. But it's always Shark Week somewhere.
That's right.
Remember that.
And you do a shark impression too, don't you?
I do a shark impression. You want to see it? I can sign off on that if you want.
Yeah.
All right, here's my impression of Jaws.
And with that, we're going to close the show. Thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. Thank you for joining our special Shark Week episode. Luke, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at Cheese on Couch, and you can also find me on theconguy.com.
Jake, where can people find you?
On Instagram at the Jacoba System.
Ben?
And unfortunately, my camera froze up, but at least I look pretty good in my frozen picture.
Yeah, it looks so happy, still.
Right? You can find me on social media at BENKLIEWER. And that's I'm mostly active on Twitter and Instagram.
All right. And Carl, if people want to find out about what's going on with you or
Facebook, 2 pages, my personal page, and a page called The Quintessential Carl Gottlieb, and my website, which is under construction, but which will be back up, called jawslog.com. And that's it.
That's fantastic. Again, Carl, this has been our pleasure today. Everybody, thank you for watching the show. Hopefully you will follow us at theconguy.com and continue to watch the shows. Happy Shark Week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Where can we find you, Jim?
Oh, Jim Priale on Twitter. All right. Follow me there, guys. Talk to you guys soon.
All right.
Thank you for watching today's show with Carl Gottlieb. What a great guy, and actually it's my birthday today, so what better day to share such a great episode with you. We have so much that we've loved just doing for you this week with the Shark Week episodes. Go back and check out our old episodes. We did the Return of the Orca Project. We had Joe Alves himself talking about the making of the shark. We had Jeffrey Voorhees, who played Alex Kidner, and we had Jeffrey Kramer, who was Deputy Hendricks. And we have tomorrow's show we are very excited about with Greg Nicotero himself, gigantic Jaws fan, and also restored one of the only remaining Bruce sharks that was used for Universal Studios promotion. It's from the original mold, so we are very excited to show that to you. Happy birthday to me, and happy Shark Week.
Thank you.